What's the most paranormal thing that has happened to you? Several years ago, my mom, dad, and I were out running errands. My mom had to pull over to use the bathroom at a business. If I recall, it was some sort of restaurant. The parking lot was empty of other cars and people, and we sat in the car waiting. We both had our windows down, I in the front passenger seat, my dad directly behind me, when quite loudly we heard someone shout, "Tim!" which was my dad's name. We both turned to look behind us, because that's where we thought we heard it from. My dad asked if I heard it too. My mom was nowhere in sight yet, so I jumped out to see if there was anyone around, but I neither saw another car or person on foot. It was super weird. Staying at a creepy cabin with my family when I was a young teenager. In the middle of the night, I was sitting in bed, my back against the wall. Right behind me, I heard clear as day a woman say, "I'm behind you." The wall led outside, there's no rooms behind me. From 1992 until mid-1998, my family hung out with another family a lot. They had a son I played baseball and went to school with, and they had an older daughter who would watch us, my little sister, my friend and I, while our parents went out for dinner. A week before Christmas 1998, the daughter had come home from her freshman year of college and was going to meet a friend at the mall, and was tragically killed by a drunk driver. It naturally devastated my friend's family, and our families stopped hanging out much. However, my dad and his dad would meet for breakfast once a month, and his dad said that there had been some strange things going on since she died. Their dogs would stare into her room and wag their tail, and one would lay in her bed exactly how he did when he would lay with her. They would also smell her perfume, and they thought my friend was spraying it, but they hid the bottle and still smelled it. My dad told us this, and I was skeptical until I went to his house one day to hang out. We were walking upstairs to his room, and as we turned to go down the hallway, his dog was standing at her door, looking up, tail wagging, mouth open with his tongue out, and then began backing up like a dog would when someone was walking at it with his eyes fixed on something. I assumed his mom and dad were in there, but nobody was in her room. My friend just shrugged and said, "Hey, his sister's name, miss you." I would have never ever believed it if I didn't see it. We have a clock that tells the time. It's a little pyramid from the 80s or 90s. You touch the tip, it beeps and speaks the current time, horribly, you can hardly understand it. But it does that. It was my dad's. My dad died. So often when I think of him, it just goes off randomly. It's probably just crappy sensors from being so old. But I swear, it always seems to strike right when he comes to mind and never happens. On its own. When he isn't. Building I used to work in was haunted. Lots of weird stuff, shadows, noises, motion-sensitive things would go off when no one was around, things falling off shelves for no reason, all the usual. The ladies' room in the basement would regularly have noises coming from it that sounded like several girls whispering and giggling. If you stood outside the door, you would feel like you could almost make out what they were saying but couldn't quite understand it. The noise would stop if you went into the bathroom and wouldn't happen again until another night. There was also a creepy, emaciated old man that would stand behind my car blocking me from backing up. He was only visible in the rear view mirror. If I turned around to look at him, he wouldn't be there. It didn't matter where in the lot I parked, he would still show up. It got so bad I stopped looking in my mirror before backing up. But the worst one was a night that a coworker and I were the last two to leave and were locking up. I went to leave a note on the receptionist's desk for her for the morning, and while I was writing it, I noticed on her phone system screen it showed a phone in the basement call center was just picked up. It then showed it dialed another extension in the call center, and that extension started blinking showing it was ringing. The second extension was then picked up. At that point I wondered if someone was still in the call center, so I used the call monitor to listen in on the call. What we heard was a weird raspy noise that sounded like a mix of heavy breathing and a really slow burp. It went on for several seconds then stopped. Then the phone system showed one extension hung up and then the other. I hung up the receptionist's phone and my coworker, and I decided whatever the hell was downstairs was welcome to play with the phones all it wanted, because there was no way we were going down there to investigate. We locked up and left. I did not look in my mirror before backing out of my parking spot. I was a kid. I was sleeping on my grandparents' couch. I woke up and saw my grandpa in the kitchen, but it wasn't my grandpa as I knew him. He was emaciated and pale, wearing a hospital robe. He was also translucent like a ghost. Years later I saw him in the same green hospital gown, but it was for real this time, as he was in the hospital. Emaciated and pale. Dying from mesothelioma. I have a little sister who is 5 years younger than me. When I was around 10, and she was 5, she had an imaginary friend. I didn't think much of it because that's what kids do, I guess. That was until she informed us he was a little boy but older than her, and she always sees him swinging from his neck from the tree branch in our backyard. My mom asked her, "Why is he on the tree?" To which she responded, "He wanted to see his dad." Out of morbid curiosity, my dad looked up if anyone died in our house. An 11-year-old boy hung himself a few weeks after his dad passed away in a car wreck. I was alone in the house. I saw a man walking a dog out the window. Dad texted me to check the post. I opened the door to see the shadow of the man and dog coming toward me, so I shut the door and ran to the kitchen. I stood staring at the door, and somebody was standing there. It was an all-black figure. You can usually see clothes through the frosted glass, but this was all black. I wasn't going to open it as I wasn't expecting anybody. I turned my head for a second and the silhouette had gone. I walked to the living room and saw the man and dog were gone. I don't know what it was, but it was very creepy. Years ago I lived in this complex for at youth risks. There was a giant shared yard/patio in the middle and one building on the right, another left, and another in the middle that was abandoned and locked off. Anyways, in the 80s the middle one had 4 girls apparently get into some altercation resulting in them all dying. I don't know the details. People said you could hear them arguing at times loudly. For a year, I never heard a sound. One day I'm outside having a cigarette with about 7 other guys and we heard screaming coming from there, like blood-curdling screams and girls screaming in a mix of Spanish and English. Lights were turning on, and you could see things slamming. One guy managed to convince 2 to go check with him in case some people snuck in and were in danger. As they were going in you could still hear it, and even when they were inside. One of them said when they walked in that it sounded like it was all around them, and another said when he was clearing the rooms on the left side that in the corner of his eye he saw 2 young women screaming at each other, and when he went to face them they were gone. Before they went in, we called the police. When one and his partner rolled up, the screams and shit was still happening, so he called back up as he ran inside. All 5 came out after it stopped, just in shock. Other cops showed up and they were checking it multiple times. Nothing was ever found. We spoke about it very rarely after that. My mom tells the story of the house she lived in when she was pregnant with me. One time she tripped on the stairs and felt like something caught her and prevented her from falling. They found out after they moved out that a baby died in that house. When I was about 12 years old, my brother and I visited our grandfather's gravestone for the first time. He had died young and we had never met him. Our aunt, his daughter, who lived nearby to the cemetery, would visit occasionally, and she told us she had experienced strange coincidences several times surrounding her visits. On the drive there she told us he would have been happy that we were coming. It was a completely overcast day, 100% gray and drizzly. As we approached his side about a row away, my aunt said, "Now watch this." We stepped up to his stone, and suddenly the sky above us parted very quickly, until there was a clear blue patch right above us. The sun came through and rays shined down right on top of us. All 3 of us were speechless and still remember the moment, now almost 30 years ago. I like to think he was telling us he was happy to see us. The third man syndrome. I believe this phenomenon happened to me on a cold wintry night in NYC. Having just left the Comedy Cellar, and being on vacation, I decided to explore a bit of NYC, got lost. Well, I knew where I was, I just didn't know where a subway entrance was. It was like 2 a.m. at this point, still some people walking around, but I started to freak out since it was freezing and I was nowhere near my hotel. Then suddenly I heard a male voice directly behind me, like whispering it to me, telling me to go 2 streets up north and turn right for the train station. I turned around to thank him, and no one was there. I flipped out and ran. Ironically, I followed the voice's direction and saw the subway entrance, and was back at the hotel before 3. I like to believe it's because of how cold it was and my mind was in do or die mode, and it somehow subconsciously remember where the subway was, and the voice was it telling me. Working in a hotel down a corridor on my own and during the day. I was the head housekeeper and would occasionally deep clean rooms if I had the time and the hotel was quiet. It was a narrow corridor with 10 rooms, 5 either side, and quite possibly the most renowned for paranormal activity. I could hear the continuous banging of a window in the wind in one of the rooms, so I knocked on each door and called, "Hello, housekeeping," even though I knew each room was empty. I found the window and closed it fully, but as I walked back to the top of the corridor and into the first bedroom that I was working in, a loud, gravelly, rough male voice shouted, "Hello," loudly right in my ear. The hair stood up on my arms and neck, and I ran to my office panting in fear. About a month before, one of my staff had seen an old lady holding onto the dado rail on the corridor, as if exhausted and struggling to breathe. She put her work things down and went to open the fire door in between them to ask the guest if she was okay, but she disappeared into thin air in front of her eyes. She too ran to my office in shock and said that when she first saw her, she didn't realize at the time, but the lady was actually in black and white, and so was the corridor behind her, like she was watching an old film through the glass. This is in the UK. Many things. Plate falling out of a cupboard for no reason at all, while I was home alone. The cupboard door never opened or closed. The house would yell, howl, my name from its guts. Don't ask me to explain, because I can't. It came from the house, but not inside the house. Just the house itself. It would turn the motion lights on, inside the house, when we knew there was no valid reason for them to come on. Last but not least, a friend of a family member stopped by with said family member. After making way through the living room, friend said jokingly, "So where's your ghost?" The lights dimmed down and back up before I could even get a word out. The 3 of us were standing right in front of the dimmer dial, and none of us touched it. My house is super haunted. We have so much happen here. My husband, 2 kids, and I have numerous stories. I'm a police/911 dispatcher, so when all 4 of us started having experiences, my first thought was, we have a carbon monoxide leak. That was the logical explanation, and is not the case. 1. We have the mimic. This is the most active. We have all heard each other's voices calling out, saying different things. There have been times where 2 or 3 of us have heard it at the same time. The dogs hear it too. The one time it hissed in my ear was the creepiest. I felt my hair move. 2. The one I call twinkling lights. This one seems to like me the best. I'll catch twinkling lights out of the corner of my eye, but it's gone by the time I look. The whole atmosphere in the house gets really, I don't know, thick when this one appears. Usually followed by an overwhelming sense of intense fear. I'm the only one that has seen this one so far, but everyone feels the change in the house at the same time. 3. Bill. He's the first owner, died in the house. He's a perv, knocks shit off the shower shelves when we're in there. Likes to play pranks. We have shit disappear and reappear in the weirdest spots. I'm pretty sure it's Bill. My grandfather had died about a month prior to this happening. He had throat cancer, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but he ended up suffocating to death somehow. I had an uncle who had a mental break and ended up shooting my aunt in the back of the head, my other uncle in the leg, and then killed himself. A family member called my mom and I so we could go to my dad's house and be there when they broke the news, since we knew he was going to have a very intense reaction. As my uncle called my dad to tell him, my dad was on the porch and my sister and I were in the living room. I am 13 years older than her, so I was just there to make sure she didn't get too freaked out. I was 16, and she was 3 at the time. So as my dad was finding out about this, my sister looks up at the ceiling and says, "I see my grandpa and he's blue." Which weirded me out because he obviously would have turned some sort of blue while suffocating. Then I took her up to her room when my dad came in so she didn't have to see his outburst, completely destroyed the whole first story of his apartment, and we went to play in a little princess tent she had. Then she started screaming about the monsters trying to get her. I ended up pretending a little princess wand she had was a sword for the monsters and it calmed her down, but if she could see Grandpa, I wonder what the monsters were. My mom and I had moved to a new house to get away from my dad. There were black and white pictures of trees and stuff on the wall in the dining room and kitchen. They went well with the decor, so we just left them there when we moved. About 3 years after we moved in, all in one night, they fell off the wall one by one. I was sleeping in the living room that night, and was obviously very freaked out. It wasn't storming or anything, completely calm night, so it wasn't from the house shaking. Eventually I was able to fall back asleep and was woken up to someone throwing a brick at our window. It was a very nice neighborhood and that was the only time anything weird ever happened, but it definitely freaked me out. I am a New Orleans native. I've lived pretty much consistently in Baton Rouge for the last 35+ years. When Katrina happened, my mother and sisters evacuated to my place. So it was like 6 weeks or so after the storm, waters were down, and my family had returned to their homes. I decided to drive around Lakeview to, sightsee? I had lived in that neighborhood as a child, and it was familiar to me. It was also one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in NOLA. I drove around for a bit, had to pull over to cry for a bit. When I got home later, my then husband asked how it was and I said completely unconsciously, "There were ghosts everywhere." My ex said later, "You looked really surprised and scared after you said that." I still don't know why I said that, it just came out. I didn't even consciously think that, let alone form the thought to say it. I had felt watched once or twice. Of course, this was after I got a phone call 2 days after the storm from my brother who was doing a tour in Iraq and was frantic to know where the family was because he didn't know if they'd evacuated. I spoke to him, then handed the phone to my mom who talked to him for about 5 minutes. The phone line had been out before the call, so I assumed my phone service had been restored. I went to use the phone later, and the line was out. It stayed out for 6 weeks. Apparently the line was only functional in order to let my brother contact us. That one still creeps me out a little. When I was about 3 years old and my brother was an infant, my mom was holding him in our living room and I was playing on the floor next to them. I heard my name being called and I looked up at my mom and asked if it was her. She hadn't been sure she actually heard it until I had asked. It happened again and she could tell it was coming from my bedroom. And then a ball came rolling out of the room on our carpeted floor, and when it got closer, it stopped and changed direction to come directly to us. To this day, I don't think any of the spirits in that house were bad, and there hasn't been activity there in many, many years. We had a lot of things happen. My dad still lives there. I have a 100-year-old house. Never felt anything weird or ominous here. But every damn day just about sitting at my desk the floor moves like someone walked behind my chair, it moves my chair up and down. I finally put a mirror on my desk so I can see behind me and no one is ever there, but this happens super frequently. Not near anything that would explain it, on a raised foundation, happens all times of day and night. This story happened to me back in 1998 when I was 13 years old. My little sister had just been born and was a few months old. I live in the Netherlands, Drenthe, which is considered the countryside. I lived in a small residential area, nowhere near a big city. Also there was no army base anywhere close to us. We lived in a flat/apartment on the 3rd and last floor. In front of the flat there was a huge field of grass. About 2 soccer fields big. On the other end of the field there was another flat. Same as ours. There was nothing on the field except for 2 trees on our side of the field. They were standing next to each other about 3 meters, 10 feet, apart. The trees were about 10-15 m, 32 to 50 feet, away from our flat. We could oversee the whole field from our kitchen window as well as a few blocks of houses. At that time I slept on a mattress on the floor in my mom's room. My baby sister also slept there in her crib, but my mom would often not wake up during the nights. So I would do diaper changes and night feeds. My mom was a single mom. One night my mom woke me up. She said she wanted to know if I saw what she saw, because she thought she was hallucinating. When I came into the kitchen, It was completely lit up. But from the outside. I looked outside the window and I saw some kind of oval-shaped fireball. Just hovering there in between the two trees. It was about 8 feet, above the ground, and the ball was about the same size. My mom said she had been watching it for about 10 minutes already, and asked me to describe what I saw, so I would not be influenced by what she thought she was seeing. The oval-shaped core had the brightest light I've ever seen, and I can't even describe it. Around the core were flames in the colors ranging from orange to violet. After about 10 minutes I got into a stage of panic, running to the bedroom and pulling the blanket over me from head to toe, thinking I had seen something I was not supposed to. The next day we went and looked for tracks, like scratch marks, leftover fireworks. You name it. We found nothing. We also asked people in the neighborhood. They said it was probably fireworks, lighting from thunder or the sun. It was none of it. Fireworks don't hover like that without any sound. The sun still had to come up. It wasn't lightning either. Again, there was no sound and the sky was clear. Does anyone know what I saw all those years ago? Or seen a similar thing? I'm dying to know. When my uncle was a kid, in his bedroom there was a big mirror on the wall, was there for many years, and his bed was below it. He was lying on his bed trying to go to sleep, and he said he swore he heard one of his brothers call his name from the hallway. He knew his 3 brothers were out of the house with friends, but he got up to go check just to make sure and no one was there. He went to his parents' room, and they were sleeping. A few seconds later, that big mirror fell right onto his bed where he was lying and shattered. He thinks it was his gram that passed away, saving him from whoever touched the mirror. Ever since I was born, my gram and I got very close. She has 4 sons, 3 grandsons, and 1 granddaughter, aka me. My parents and I lived with her till I turned 5 and we moved up the street so I could visit her whenever. I'd talk to her on the phone every single day. She would always tell me when she passes away, she will mess with my lights, so I know she is still with me. Well, she passed away in the hospital from cancer in 2013. That night when we got the call, we all went to the hospital to say bye and get paperwork. When we got home, my parents dropped my brother and I off and went down to her house with my pap. I was sitting in my room crying and my lights started to flicker a few times. I thought it was just the entire house. I asked my brother, and he said no, nothing flickered. A few days after her funeral, my lights flickered again. My dad ended up taking my ceiling fan down to make sure everything was okay with the electrical, and it was. A little bit of time passed, and my parents were right outside my room in the hallway and my lights flickered again. They saw it with their own eyes, so I knew I wasn't seeing things. To this day, it will happen occasionally, and I still believe it's been my gram just letting me know she is with me. The house I grew up in is very old. Built in 1810 or so. Growing up we would always hear odd sounds. Large bangs or someone walking upstairs usually. Never saw anything. To many years later. We go to visit my mom who is still in the house. My son was 2 or 3. He was staying in a bedroom next to my mother's. In the morning my mom tells me that my son didn't sleep much. She said she could hear him talking and laughing most of the night. I asked him about it, and he says, "I was talking to the solider, he's funny." I ask him to describe the solider, and he says, "He had a funny hat and a red jacket." The house is in a town that was the scene of a very famous Revolutionary War battle. If I had asked my son the day before what color a solider wore, he'd have said green. Freaky. My mom, sister, and I are all sensitive to spirit. I've only seen a spirit once, while other experiences were mostly through having an internal sense that something else was present. Sometimes unexplained things would happen to my physical surroundings when I had that gut feeling. When I moved to my current house, I first lived in the basement apartment for a few years. Immediately I knew there was a presence. I just knew. It wasn't malevolent necessarily, nor good, but definitely aware of me and sometimes watching intensely. I knew it was male, and that it stayed almost exclusively in my bathroom. I felt it watching me the most when I showered. I convinced myself that maybe I was just loony and nothing was actually there. Even if it was, I didn't want to interact with it anyways. About a year ago, a friend of a friend came over. I had never met him before and also had never mentioned the spirit to the friend that had invited him. We all hung out, he used the restroom, and then we headed outside to smoke. Once we left the property, he told us that he saw something in the bathroom. He was standing up facing the toilet, when he noticed a face in his peripheral vision by the door. He initially thought it was just one of us being super weird and peeping. When he turned around, he saw a man's face in the doorway, staring dead at him. He was older, and had a creepy, steady gaze. He was there for a second or two when my friend blinked and the face disappeared. I was honestly shaken when I heard this, but also a bit relieved when I realized I was maybe a little less crazy than I'd thought. Thankfully, I have since moved upstairs and haven't had an issue or supernatural experience since. I was probably around 11 or 12 and went to go to the bathroom at night, and I saw a dark figure of a woman sitting on the toilet and turned to look at me, and for a brief moment I thought it was my mom. I noticed my parents' bedroom door was open and went to check it and saw my mom laying there sleeping, and I started to freak out. Still had to pee really bad though, so I ran to the other bathroom, and when I came back it was gone. Since I was little I've always known that there was this little girl haunting my house. Most of the time she is very friendly, but one night she gave me the fright of my life. I was with my phone sitting in the middle of the hallway alone at home when I suddenly feel a something behind me. I decided to turn off my phone and look at the reflection behind me, and there she was staring straight at me. Safe to say I never stayed at home alone for a long time. I've had a lot of odd and potentially paranormal things happen to me over the years, and I usually tell one of those stories in these kinds of threads, but this time I'll tell something different. This one I don't even believe was anything like that, but maybe someone else will see the paranormal and or spiritual in. My wife was dying in the hospital. She'd had cancer for a while, and it was bad. Then she got pneumonia and it was worse. We eventually decided to let her go and unplug the ventilator. She survived for a couple hours, but her breathing was labored and mechanical. By this point a part of me was still hoping/expecting her to start breathing normally and come back to us, but as time went on it became clear she was on her way out. As the final half hour or so dragged on, her breathing became slower and more raspy. Then there was a moment that only lasted a minute or two, where she opened her eyes for the first and only time in a couple days, but she just stared straight up at the ceiling. No reaction to anyone in the room. Then her eyes closed, and her labored breathing continued for another 15 minutes or so until it eventually slowed to stillness. At the time, as well as now, I took that as the final acts of a dying brain struggling for oxygen, but you can think of it however you like. Maybe she saw the light, or a family member that went before. Maybe that was the moment her soul left and her body just hadn't quite stopped yet. I don't know. Just thought that might be worth sharing for someone out there. Oh, and since I'm on the topic of my late wife, we also had a ghost cat following us around for many years, over the course of several moves to different states, and it disappeared after she passed. I know it sounds very matter-of-fact, but we both saw it so many times, sometimes at the same time, that there was no denying it. I always had the impression it was following her specifically, and I guess I got that confirmation. When I was a kid, I had no idea my grandma was moving out of state. They were having a house built, so I never had even visited the property either. I had this dream where I was walking with her in the woods down a rock-lined path, and we stopped at this point where there was this semicircle carved out in the rocks on the right side. She gave this Vanna White-style motion with her arms showing this carve-out contained unidentified junk on the ground, and the dream ended. Q 2 months later, the house was finished, Grandma had moved, and we went down to visit. After showing us the house and yard, she showed us this path in the woods behind the house, which was lined with rocks, which had this little carve-out, where she made that same arm motion to show us that the carve-out contained food scraps and stuff for a compost pile. In 2012 we built a new apartment to an old attic. There were some existing rooms there, but everything was heavily redone. In one room we covered an existing doorway, and built a new one in different location. Several years later our daughter was born and that room became her room. One night when she was about 3 to 4 years old we were putting her to bed. She suddenly sat up in her bed, pointed to where the old doorway used to be and said, "Nobody walks through there anymore." There was no indication there had ever been a door there, nor had we discussed it. When I was 12 years old I had a sleepover at my friend's house with 4 other girls my age. Our parents all went out for a concert, a night of partying, so we decided to make a homemade Ouija board and see if it worked. Well, to keep it somewhat short, it ended up working and every single one of us were paralyzed in fear, and it told us things that we couldn't possibly have knowledge of. We connected with the man who previously owned my friend's house, and turns out in the 70s he murdered his wife and children, burying them in the woods behind her house. Before he was caught by police, he blew his brains out in the backyard. Once we were scared shitless, we threw it away. Went to sleep that night, and I'm a very light sleeper. I watched with my own 2 eyes the wood and glass sliding door. It connected the drop-in living room and kitchen, pushed itself the wrong way, it only slid open one way, and the glass panes broke and the wood splintered. It was probably my scariest paranormal encounter. Another I had was at my aunt's 200-year-old farmhouse. They told us there were ghosts there, and the one they always encountered, they named George. My sister and I slept in the same bed, and I watched strands of her hair floating in her sleep, like someone was running their fingers through her hair. And I watched the cover lift at the end of the bed, and I felt something touch my feet like they were tickling them. It freaked me out solely because I watched the cover and her hair float. It doesn't matter if they're nice or mean, it's all about the power they possess. That scares the shit out of me. I have connections with lost souls and the dead, and I honestly wish I didn't. I'm an insomniac because of all the random dead people and family members that are dead coming into my dreams. My aunt's room at my grandma's house had a 2-foot-tall doll lamp. You'd have to raise its arm to turn on the light. One day I was there alone, and I go into the bedroom to grab a blanket from the closet and notice the room got brighter. I turn around and the doll's arm is up in full Hitler salute. I immediately look away and hustle out the room. This was about 30 years ago. It still freaks me out a little thinking about it. I was house/pet sitting for my sister one night. She had a dog and cat who were outside pets, so I was alone in the house and slept with the bedroom door shut. I woke up at 2 a.m. to what sounded like something with claws crawling slowly around the bed. She had floorboards, so the scratching woke me up. Scared, I just pretended to be asleep until I did fall asleep again. About an hour later I woke up to the sound of the, already closed, bedroom door slamming shut, which jolted me awake, and I felt the weight of a person jump on top of me with their knees/legs either side of my legs and hands either side of my shoulders. It sniffed from my neck up my face, and then it was just gone. It was scary and, to be honest, just really gross. The store I work in is on the outskirt of a Civil War battlefield, and before that was a farm that had already been there for like 100 years. People joked about it being haunted, and I always just figured it was fun rumor stuff. Well, one day I was there after closing doing a project. It was only me and like 2 other people in the store when I feel a tap on my shoulder. A very physical tap. I figured it was one of my coworkers and turned around to see what they wanted, and nobody was there. To say it freaked me out would be a mild understatement. There's been other times when I've been in the store with only 1 or 2 other employees, and you can hear the unintelligible murmur of voices that feel somehow both close and far off at the same time. It's hard to describe. Also, interestingly, while I haven't personally seen her, multiple people, over years, people who did not know each other or know the story, have told me that they saw a small girl in a white dress back in the stockroom, and when they went to go get them figuring she was a lost child, she would be gone. When I was like 6 or something around there, but in the bathroom, and an empty toilet roll flew as if someone threw it with full force. I was sitting on the toilet, and there was an empty toilet roll sitting on the lid of the thing that holds the water. The empty roll just flew from straight behind me and hit the mirror. I was too small at the time to see the toilet in the mirror when I sat on it, could only see the wall. So yeah, I ended up running out of there with my pants around my ankles while screaming for my mom. That house had some more activities, and we all believed it was for sure haunted. I've told this story before, but what the hell? When I worked in retail, we had this little old lady coworker, Dee, that we all loved, that passed away from pancreatic cancer. A few weeks after her funeral, it would have been her next birthday. On that day, and only on that day, the wireless doorbell for a particular office kept ringing by itself. At one point, I was standing right in front of the button, obviously not touching it myself, and heard its chime go off in the office on the other side of the door. I open that office door and the vault attendant is there with one of the managers discussing how creeped out they are by the chime. While we're talking, it goes off again. A guy that has the office right next to that one is getting really annoyed that this keeps happening, so he pulls the button off the wall and takes the battery out. He's standing there, button in one hand, battery in the other, and I blurt out, "We love you, Miss D." The words were barely out of my mouth when that damn chime rang again. In college I was backpacking in Europe with friends, traveling from South Carolina. One night we went to the top of the Eiffel Tower at closing time. There was almost nobody else up there. Our group just stood looking out. I thought I faintly heard someone calling my last name, but I ignored it thinking I was hearing something else that maybe sounded similar. Then the group was like, "Hey, someone's calling you." So I was like, "Oh, I did hear that." We looked around and there really weren't many people on the platform. I walked to the next nearest group and asked if they called out something, but they didn't. Didn't really make any sense. In 2017 I thought I was communicating from downstairs to upstairs to my sister. It spoke to me sounding like my sister. Until I realized my sister was downstairs with me with earbuds and watching Bluey. So my foster mom told me I was hallucinating due to medications, so she told me to go upstairs and check it out. I was thrown from the top of the stairs, 12 steps, into downstairs wall, and didn't wake up for 14 hours. In my childhood house this is a creepy story. I believe in demons and stuff because of this. So I had a nightlight as a kid because I was afraid of the dark. I got over it real quick. But during that time when I had a nightlight there was a shadowy figure coming off of my fan. Can't really explain what it looks like. Basically looked like the shadow of the fan except it had arms. Basically I was a kid, I didn't think anything of it. Then we went on vacation for a week. Room completely untouched when I came back. Except one thing changed. The shadow suddenly went from having 2 arms to 4. As a kid I was like, how weird, and went to bed. Not sure when the thing disappeared, but I'm not scared of the dark anymore. If anything, I'm scared of the weird shadows. Anyway, my mom has the ability to sense demons, and she can somehow say the Lord's Prayer in her sleep in case demons invade her dreams. She claims it happened to her, and she successfully drove demons away in her sleep. She has said at multiple times that she sensed a demon has been in the house at one point. If that happened to me as an adult, I would leave the house and bring in a hose of holy water. When I was about 5, I lived in a house where it always felt like you were being watched, and things moved on their own. I had terrifying dreams about other people's lives. Once, my pregnant mom asked me to get water from the cabinet, and suddenly, I was being choked by something invisible. It only stopped when my sister entered the kitchen. Later, my mom had the house blessed by a priest, and we found out someone had been strangled there, and the murderer had also died from a stab wound. I am still afraid of ghosts because of that day. I remember the feeling from that house I lived in before, and it feels like I can sense places that might have them. My partner's house has ghosts, but when I moved into my new apartment, I felt safe. It was a new build and it didn't feel like there were ghosts. However, a week ago, a high school friend passed away, and suddenly, it didn't feel ghost-free anymore. I prayed for his wife and child, and that night, my dog's toys started crinkling on their own. I thought, it's just Garrett, and I put the dog toys on the TV stand. Then, my devices started turning on and off, and my dreams answered questions I had been pondering for months. Now, I don't feel like my apartment is clear anymore, but I don't mind too much. All my activities were honestly very scary. One of the experiences I like in particular is very cute, and also very terrifying tbh. It was in late 2019. I got my first bicycle a few months prior and loved to cycle around the park every day from 5 to 7 p.m. Now the people in the park are just a bit, like, the bad kinda, So one day I was just stopped 'cause I got thirsty and was drinking some water. All of a sudden this one guy just came running towards me, grabbed my chest and just ran away laughing. And since I was still drinking the water I choked, hard. I couldn't fucking breath. As a 13-year-old I felt humiliated because instead of doing something people just laughed. I hid behind the bushes and started crying and this tiny little girl came to me, no idea what she looked like, and asked why I was sad. I told her everything and she said, "Don't cry, if you cry I'll cry too." And she did start crying. When I finally calmed down and looked up she was nowhere to be found. I went back home, told my mom about it. She didn't do anything. OFC few days later, heard the guy broke both his arms. That day his mom came to me furious and started blaming me. When I told her what her son had done she said, and if I may quote, "Who would even like a skinny bitch like you?" Yeah, I was skinny ASF back then with my bones showing and all. Another few days later, almost like a month later actually, I finally had the courage to go back out and heard she lived after choking on water. And when I came back home shocked out of my mind, I heard that little girl giggle behind me and say something along the lines, "I hope you won't cry anymore." And I passed out. I did meth and fentanyl and got shot through my car by shadow aliens with an MEG, and they told me what it was telepathically and told me that magnetism is the answer to everything, and they tucked up my EMF so bad that the earth shot me with a healing ray of EMF because it's what my magnetic field attracted. Also ended up absorbing a bunch of energy through the collective consciousness, and was told I was the chosen one. Might have just been implanted. Government won't respond to me about it, military is playing dumb.